being. To that point, I thought Saturday night in Saudi was an incredibly interesting card
You were
to
there. Just for the people who don't know,
analyze.
you were there. You were in the building. Or yes. I don't know. Is it
I'm
in the
always
building or is it
there.
outdoors? It's outdoors? Is it?
Mm, it used to be outdoors.
Okay.
The first fight that was inside in Saudi was Fury and Ngannou. Up
Hmm.
until then, from all the way from Joshua Ruiz until Fury and Ngannou, even the Fury and Ngannou card, the undercard was outside. And then they took us inside for the main event, which was the debut, the groundbreaking of this new building, which every fight has subsequently been in. So, yes, as Saudi evolved and the sport grew there and the production grew and the money and value and the size of the event continues to grow, so did the fan experience, right? Uh, and because these cards have been so stacked, and I don't care what you say, you can't argue that these cards have been stacked. They've been, I think, very fortunate in that there have been entertaining nights. There has been some really classic matchups that we had been waiting for years that they made happen. But I sat back this time and I said to myself, the boxing gods are not going to put up with this much longer. They are going to throw some curveballs even at Saudi. This is going too well. They're not just going to let this shit stand. And so, I say that, tongue in cheek, not wishing anything negative, of course, because I'm there. We want this thing to go well. But you know how the boxing gods are, man. They're not just going to let you have a good time for too long without some kind of wrinkle in the program. And I think last Saturday night was the first program that kind of wrinkled up sufficiently.
Well, I can confirm we talked on the phone Friday before the fight. Thursday. Might have been Thursday or Friday, but
Uh-huh.
and I'm like, so who do you got, Rahim? And Rahim over the years, in order to be that much more objective, has backed away a little bit from picking fights. But I always like to get the what you got to say because you've been very good at them over the years. Like I remember just one example, Marquez Bradley. I thought, and everyone thought Marquez was going to win that fight. Like Bradley's going to beat him, and then sure enough, Bradley beats him. But but I asked you, I said, so who do you got, man? I got Beterbiev. Who do you got? And you're like, I think we get a controversial decision. I wouldn't be surprised if we get a controversial draw. And when the first scorecard got read, 114, 114, I was like, oh shit. He might have called this shit. He might have got it. And then it winds up being, majority decision for Beterbiev. And I don't yeah, it's I think a lot of people's initial reaction was Robbery and Bivol won, but I am seeing, and I'm including myself in this, a lot of people upon rewatches thinking it wasn't as controversial as they thought. It was a fight that kind of could have went either way, which even makes me wonder what do we think about rewatching fights? Like, are you now like do you go with what your eyes first saw the first time, or is there something to re-examining? But is there potential that you know like in looking deeper or looking a second time, you're beginning to see things that aren't there, or on the contrary, you can better analyze a fight the more times you watch it? Or I'm on the fence about that.
I think that excuse me, I think that all perspectives are valuable. And because what you experience in the arena from your side of the ring, from your row of the audience, is going to differ from everybody else's perspective, even if it's to a minuscule degree. The guy sitting right next to me isn't going to see exactly what I see.
Right. Let
But the
alone the
guy on
dude
the
on
other
the
side
other
of the
side of the
ring,
ring. Right, right,
exactly. And then
right.
the guy who's up in the rafters, who's in the building, but watching most of it on the Megatron, isn't going to see what I see or what you see on TV
Right.
necessarily. And there is, because, like we just spoke about, this level of technology that we're experiencing right now has changed the conversation around boxing. The level of technology that YouTube brought into the game has changed what the analysis of boxing is, how it's consumed by the audience. Well, the
Yeah,
way
before your
that
rewatch
we
couldn't happen for a week until HBO replayed the fight. Now it's like, okay, I'm
right
gonna watch it again like right now, right after the right. So
well, what you can also get right now is accurate statistics on what happened in the fight, which is only this last year, not even an entire year on network, has Jabber stats and analytics been across AI technology, been across networks so that you can get accurate punch count and accurate statistics and analysis about what you're seeing. Because even that, and which we've learned in the post fight from this, people argue based on their naked eye. And it's hard to convince somebody, like, what are you going to believe? Statistics or your lying eyes? Well, you know what? Statistics. Because your eyes do lie to you. Because your perception can be altered by no intention of your own, but by your circumstances, right? And so this fight was so interesting because it not only asked the question, how do you judge a round? What is your criteria by which to give a fighter a round? But also, what are we actually seeing? Are all those punches from Beterbiev landing on Bivol's arms and being blocked by his gloves? Well, if that's true, why is his face so swollen? Why is he so bruised? Is it his own gloves knocking back into his face?
Which
I could even.
By the way, if that, let's say that is the case, let's say he's swelling up because of catching on the high guard, right? Well, that's a penalty for not being able to make a guy miss clean with upper body movement. Like maybe it shouldn't probably count as much as if he swole your face up with clean, effective shots. But at the same time, that's a penalty of your defense being limited to your feet and your high guard. If you were Willie Pep, Pernell Whitaker, Floyd Mayweather, Canelo even went on his best nights. If you could make a guy miss clean and not have to catch everything on the high, you know what I mean? Like, so
yeah.
then so
Well,
be it.
to your
That's
point,
a flaw
Sean,
to your style.
if he's punching through your guard,
Yes.
usually I think that means that there's a hole in your defense and it's coming through the middle, or your guard's up here and he's punching around it and still hitting your head. That's what I would traditionally think of when someone says, oh, he's punching through the guard.
Right.
But to your point, if you're tucked in, he's punching the guard, but actually the force of his punch is coming through the guard to where you're still impacted by that shot. That's up to the discretion of the judge if that counts as an effective punch.
Yes.
You can say for your card that counts. I can say for my card that doesn't count. And because there is a discretion to the judge on the criteria of how you score a round, and the more traditional questions that are being asked, that's, I think, a kind of a question out of left field that's worth asking. But a more traditional question is, how much credence do you give to pressure and aggression? How much credence do you give to landed punches if they're not necessarily impactful, but you outnumber your opponent's landed punches, but then your opponent lands the heavier shots in fewer numbers? Who wins that round? That is what this Beterbiev and Bivol fight really gives us an opportunity to analyze and ask ourselves, well, how do I judge a round? And then how does the guy I'm arguing with judge a round? And is somebody right? I think the beauty of having statistics and accurate punch stats is that we have a foundation of truth to refer to. You can have a different criteria than me. We can look at the same statistics and come to a different decision round by round. But at least we have an agreed upon set of numbers to which we can derive our decision, and which I can force you to defend your decision. If you say this guy won this round, that round, this fight, then make the numbers make sense. Explain to me with your criteria how these numbers support your decision. To me, that's revelatory. We've never had that in the sport. That changes the conversation.
Yeah, and it's just this fight too reminded me a little bit of the old school rules that I grew up with back in the day, and I'm sure you remember back in the HBO days. Who gets the benefit of the doubt, Rahim? In a
the
close,
champ.
Not just that,
the bigger draw, or the okay. So actually, you mean you're talking about okay. If you're the come forward fighter, you're going to get
back in the day. You tend to get the benefit of the doubt, that because you were pursuing the fight, pressing the action, bringing the fight to the other guy, and again, like you're saying, with how much does a judge score partially landed blows, splitting the high guard, but a lot of it catching the glove at the same time? they could look at that as effective aggression. It was effective enough to force Bivol back, to get him on his bike, to make his back touch the ropes, to make him not open up and throw a counter for 30 seconds to 60 seconds, cause some swelling on his eye. That aggression left enough of an effective aggression, you know? And some people go, what are you talking? How is it effective aggression if he's landing on the gloves, throwing arm punches, getting touched by sharp counters in the midst of that? And it's because Bivol's work seldom pushed Beterbiev back. One moment he tried to push him back and follow up on his clean counters in the 7th round. And he's pushing and letting his combinations go. Boom, he gets hit by a right hand. He has to retreat down the stretch of the last minute of the round. He lets that round get away from him. And that's kind of a microcosm of the fight. Like, you know, he seemed to have control of Beterbiev, and then the championship rounds get away from him. And I mean, a little De La Hoya Trinidad-esque, even though I thought De La Hoya won that fight, and you could still argue Bivol won this fight. But it's never a good look to fade down the stretch a little bit. And he did. And that cost him this fight. And yeah, and I know in reference to the Jabber stats, and I get no check from Jabber. This is Rahim's thing. But I saw them, and I believe it's 4 areas, right? Like it's pressure, amount of punches thrown, who landed the clean blows, and what's the 4 categories, Rahim? Because basically all but the clean punching favored Beterbiev. It represented what our eyes saw pretty well, which was one guy was landing cleaner shots, but the other guy was busier and controlled the real estate in the ring as the fight went on more, was pressuring the other guy.
Yeah, look, to your point, there were 4 metrics by which most people judge around, right? The primary metrics. And for the first time, we have a way to calculate pressure and aggression separately, which most people would just clump together and call ring generalship, right? But now we can split those different metrics and analyze them individually. And in both cases, Beterbiev, while not by a wide margin, by a significant enough margin to be on top. For instance, aggression, 35% to Bivol's 24%. And for pressure, 45% to Bivol's 39%. So he's on top in both of those metrics. And then in addition to that, now that we're talking overall fight. Of course, Sean and I know that fights are scored round by round, but we're talking flow of the fight now. We're not just talking round by round scoring. So in the flow of the fight, this is also an important statistic that the landed punches, again, by a slight margin, 233 for Beterbiev to 219 for Bivol. He's on top in all 3 of those metrics. And if you look round by round, you still get, I think, enough of an argument, because in enough of the rounds that was consistent where he was above Bivol, even if it was by a punch or 2 or by a less of a percentage margin, still in most rounds above him in these metrics. But then comes the wrinkle, right? Bivol outlanded Beterbiev with high impact punches,
like 50 to
27,
or
max impact shots, 2-1, 23 to 50.
Oh, 23 to 50, right? Not even 27.
Right. So then it comes into play. Okay, if you have all 3 of these metrics in your favor, even if slightly, then how are you judging? Are you to come forward? Listen, because here's the other thing. 1,023 punches were thrown by Beterbiev. He did not get, air quotes, through the guard or land even he only landed like a third of those punches. But if you threw twice as many punches as your opponent, you're definitely pushing the action. You're definitely the guy who is trying to make the fight.
Bro, ask Jermaine Taylor and Bernard Hopkins behind me. That's why Hopkins couldn't hold on to his belt. He landed the more effective punches against Jermaine Taylor, but the young man kept throwing and pressing Bernard, and he got the decision. Yeah.
And so with all that said, and the way I score a fight, and those big, heavy shots for me are significant in judging, but also because I felt like the margins on the other three metrics were close enough. And when you do break it down round by round, I have a draw. And here's the other thing. I'll defend it in one other way.
Cool.
When it's
So you thought you had a draw at the end of the day, at the end of the night.
so I had a draw. Okay, so my thoughts. We're not all right. We'll start this at a different point. Let me just get my train of thought back. I was saying, what the fuck was I saying?
You were just explaining, that 50 to 23 in impact blows and the other guy leading the other three categories, you ultimately
Oh,
saw a draw, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, if it's a champion versus challenger, I score even rounds because sometimes the round is even. And some people say, oh, I don't score even rounds. Well, if you're not scoring even rounds, then you're biased because that means what kicks in if the fighters are performing evenly is who you want to win or some metric that shouldn't be playing a role in who wins that round, except when there is a challenger and a champion. And an even round, by my own criteria, tie goes to the champion. If it's two champions and a unification bout, then I score an even round. If it's two challengers and there's no title on the line, or there, even if it's a vacant title you're fighting for and there's no champion, I'll score an even round. And in this case, obviously, we had two champions, not only in a unification bout, but an undisputed bout nonetheless, which I think you have to win the round to win the round, or you will get even rounds. And so that's why ultimately overall I have a draw, because neither one of these fighters, if we're looking, because there's another thing I like to say is that we can discuss who won the boxing match or we can discuss who won the fight. And sometimes those two things are different. So if you're looking at your scorecard, I can accept that you might have Bivol by a round. It's harder for me to see it as Beterbiev by a round. But if you show me your card and make your case, make your case. I'm not saying you're crazy. I'm not saying it's a fucking robbery if Beterbiev comes out ahead on your card. I'm just saying I'd like to hear your criteria and make the numbers make sense by your criteria. But for me, I could see Bivol winning, edging it on somebody's cards without a whole bunch of explanation. Like I get it. I can find a way to do that. But it's a draw for me because if I look at my box score, it's a draw because to your point and Teddy Alice's point, the championship rounds are important. They're not more important than the first three rounds.
No.
But perception-wise, you can lose a fight there in the mind of the audience. And you shouldn't lose a boxing match that way. But if you lose the fight that way, then people are more readily going to accept that you lost a boxing match, even if you shouldn't have, if that makes sense. Right?
No,
I think the fight was a draw and the boxing match was a draw for me. I'm more easily swayed that the boxing match wasn't a draw, but I'm certain that the fight was.
yeah, I think it's always better. I think Jim Lampley used to say this. It's better to close the show strong than to start strong. To more times than not, he'd explain, in the first half of the fight, judges are still trying. It's harder to sweep the first six than it is to sweep the last six, especially in a fight like this where you're coming in with preconceived notions that both guys are so evenly matched. You might even second guess yourself, like Bivol 5-0. Damn, I couldn't find
Is
a
that
round
right?
in
He's
there to
getting his
give the
ass
better
whooped
BS.
now. Yeah, exactly.
Right, right. And so, ultimately, like when I watch this fight again, I usually love scoring round by round, and I gave up after a round or two. I rewatched the fight twice, and I just gave up and just fell into watching the fight as one big fight, which again is not how fights are judged. And when I just watched, I came away feeling a little bit like I think Bivol you're so right. Like it really probably should have been a draw because you have two. I don't think either guy really thinks they won. Like to be
They say, listen, Sean, and here's the beauty of it. And I miss Sean on the road, man. I miss being able to be in the press conference with you in the hallway while we're trying to get at the fighters in their locker room, having that discussion. Even sometimes you can't say it because you're in the mix of the fighters and their entourage, but you make that eye contact. Me and Sean, like, boy, we know this motherfucker didn't win. You know what I mean? And those are moments I cherish. Sean getting his fucking Dippin' Dots.
Well, I remember being at the Garden and Lomachenko had stopped Linares, and it was a great job. And Arum goes up there, the great bot, and he's like, he's the greatest fighter since Sugar Ray Leonard and Muhammad Ali, and we're like,
wow,
yeah. But again, like Bivol afterwards, super classy in defeat. You know, Andre Ward's like, you're being too classy in defeat. Like, you know, a lot of people thought you won that fight, but he, I think what I sense from Bivol is I let it slip. Not saying I don't think I won or lost, but I let it slip. And then from Beterbiev, he said, I got lucky. Allah chose me. Like that's not exactly like, I know I won this fight. You know,
neither one of them said that they didn't win, but they both said that they didn't do as well as they wanted to.
Neither was satisfied with their performance.
That's the point. Dissatisfied. Yeah. The audience was dissatisfied for one reason or the other, either because they thought the other man won or because they wanted their man to do better in victory. And the fighters
it wasn't a classic. It was a good pitched battle. Both guys showed skills and will and championship pedigree, but it wasn't a classic. And that's what you always hope for in these kind of fights, is either a classic fight or a classic performance, like Crawford Spence. Fight didn't live up to it, but Terrence Crawford's performance lived up to it. We didn't get either out of this. We just got a good fight that was really close.
Now, a person like me, I love a good conversation and a great debate. So for me, and you're right, I am absolutely 100% face of jabber and back it 1,000% on accuracy and its importance to being implemented in the sport across all fights. So I stand on that. And when I knew that this fight was going to be controversial, I was glad to have jabber as a talking point and to have it as a base factual set of numbers by which we could have this argument, because I like the debate. I was like, oh, this is a classic boxing debate. So I like to hear where people are coming from and where they get to based on how they judge the sport and how they view pugilism. With that said, I would prefer a classic in the ring than a classic conversation. Right? And